Hello and welcome to another Overwatch League team preview. We're going to be looking at the San Francisco Shock this time around. I'm MonteCristo. Joining me again is Sideshow, of course, Overwatch analyst, over.gg writer, and former TF2 caster. So a long time dealing with these sort of arena shooters in various games. And we're going to talk about San Francisco. So starting with their preseason performance, we saw San Francisco play more games than other teams besides Seoul, because the Philadelphia Fusion were unable to participate in the preseason due to player logistics issues.
They were swimming.
We'll put it that way.
Across the Atlantic.
We'll put it that way. So first off, they came up and they beat the Florida Mayhem 3-1. Then they lost a close series 3-2, so it went to the tiebreaker against the LA Valiant. And then they got utterly decimated by the London Spitfire on the final day. So we saw some interesting things from this roster. Now, this is a team, and I feel like we're beating a dead horse right now, that has two players that are both very good in Sinatraa and Super, who are not going to be eligible until halfway through the season because they turn 17, or they turn 18 rather. They are currently 17, and they turn 18, and then when the eligibility windows opens, they will be able to play. So a lot of San Francisco is how many games can they win without these players? How good are they going to look? And what do we expect from them in the first half versus the second half of the season? Because it's going to have probably an entirely different character to them. But it was encouraging, at least, to see that they could win matches and then at least make things close against teams like the Valiant without these players.
Yeah, absolutely. They seem like they've got a system set up already where they want to play massively around babybay.
Yes.
And I'm not even sure whether the addition of Sinatraa and Super is going to change that too much, or whether that's just going to add more firepower in certain situations. It certainly seems like they've taken babybay and gone, we're going to build a team around you. You're nuts. And so everything seems to be about putting him in position to shine and setting up the rest of the team to either make space for him or take advantage of the space that he creates.
And this has worked, right? It worked very well against Florida. It worked pretty well against Valiant. It worked horribly badly against London because they identified this and shut babybay down super hard. We saw a lot of basically they were just having their own sniper try and snipe babybay behind, but the Spitfire sniper was behind the Orisa shield. So let's just go dive into babybay real quick. So babybay is a very interesting player. We know him primarily as a Soldier 76 player. He was a great Soldier player, and now he's been playing a lot of Widowmaker as a result of the current meta, but he's also shown a lot of other heroes as well. So a player that has a lot of flexibility and is definitely sort of the identity player that this roster is being built around, as you say, at least for the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's shown that he has flexibility coming out the wazoo. He's just been kind of penned into certain heroes, I think, because of the meta and because certain teams think that he has the most impact there. So his Soldier 76 was pretty incredible and was the focal point of the previous team he played for, Kangana. And now when he's come into this team, we saw him play massively as the focal point on Widowmaker. He was literally defining whether or not they won fights based on how they were and the rest of the team were literally just set up around him as well, not even trying for other plays. But he's also got a really good McCree. He can play the Genji pretty well. He's got pretty good versatility. So I think babybay is going to be one of the stars that's kind of upcoming. Previously wasn't on a world-class championship team, but is a world-class championship player potentially if they can get the system working to actually come up with results. Because the problem in Overwatch with putting one guy in such a position is that it's pretty easy just to shut down one guy. There are a ton of heroes and ways that you can play the game and take fights just to shut down one guy. And London showed it when they were playing against.
Yeah, that was bad. So when we look at the player he played most with in the DPS role was Dante. Now, Dante's a very interesting player because he actually came over from Minecraft. He was like a Minecraft YouTuber.
How crazy is that?
It's fucking awesome story. So he's a Minecraft YouTuber who comes over to Overwatch and starts playing a very mechanically demanding position and runs in the Tracer role. Now, Dante in the preseason he was pretty, like, I would say below average, not terrible, but like slightly below average in this tracer role. He wasn't making a lot of the big plays. He was mostly serving as a distraction from babybay, if anything else, more of a supportive DPS style player. What did you think about his preseason look?
Yeah, it wasn't mind blowing. Dante, I think from so the first thing to say is that Dante previously, when he was playing on the highest other level team that he's played for, which was Arc 6, who at some point were kind of
They were good.
top five in North America. I had them as top 10 in the world at some point, controversially. But Dante was playing flex.
Do you regret your decision?
I don't regret my decision.
Okay.
Never regret any decision. That's the key. Dante was playing the flex at that point, so he was playing diva. So this is, although he's always been able to play the tracer, this is the first time where he's, I think, going to be playing it at such a high level, and having to put up such consistent performances. And kind of the buzz after he had played from people who've played with him or seen his scrims or coached him in the past was that they were underwhelmed with his performance as well, that they thought he could hit higher peaks. I haven't seen him play Tracer at that kind of level before, but if they're to be believed, then there's more to come from Dante, hopefully, if he's able to play at his potential. But it's also the case that Dante could literally just be a placeholder for Sinatraa, who we know can hit that kind of level. So if they're just going to run this kind of style where they have the DPS player supporting babybay, then he could do a reasonable job of that, I think.
Yeah, and if he can, even in the short term, we do have iddqd. So a lot of us who know Overwatch well, we're not expecting a lot out of iddqd. This is a player who was held over. So San Francisco Shock is owned by Energy and Andy Miller from the Sacramento Kings. So iddqd is a holdover from the old Energy roster. And this is interesting because he was a big name early on in the scene, was doing quite well, known for Tracer McCree play, and then fell off pretty hard, and we didn't see a lot of iddqd. So when he came in the preseason, we really didn't know what to expect from him, but if anything, he vastly outperformed expectations, and I think he played a lot better on Tracer, and then we saw some good Bastion play from him as well, compared to Dante. He had, I think, a higher peak at least.
Yeah, and iddqd, as you said, is someone that people didn't expect this from because he's been gone for the scene for so long. He really only hit his highest peaks on McCree when he was playing that and the entire team was playing around him in Fnatic. And that was in September 2016 that he was playing at that point. So the guy has been living on borrowed fame for a while. And hasn't really put up any kind of performances since then. So it would be realistic to say that everybody was expecting him to have dropped off. But his Tracer performance was actually pretty good. And the way that he was coordinating with the team was also pretty good. His mechanical level looked like he was up there. So perhaps this is going to be a rebirth of sorts for iddqd, and he's going to be able to come back into it. Previously, he was the focal point of teams, and now it seems like he's happy to play a more supportive role, or at least that's what he was playing. Who knows whether he was happy.
He worked really well within the system, though. I think that's what impressed me the most, was that he knew his role, he was performing his role very well, and we didn't get to see him, unfortunately, against London because I think he was gone. I'm not exactly sure what happened there. But we only got to see him on the first day of competition. But I think he really outperformed a lot of what people were expecting from him. So I'm excited to see more of his play. So the final DPS player on this roster is Nevix. And Nevix is a player who's played every position in Overwatch at this point in time. He's played on so many different teams. He's been known as a very flexible player. We've seen him with some amazing Mei play in the past. We've also seen him as a support. We've also seen him as a Genji player. So where is Nevix on this roster? Because he's been sort of this jack of all trades. Has been bouncing around from team to team for a while.
He definitely has, and I think that was why he was such a good pickup for San Francisco Shock, because people had question marks about their flex support play. He could definitely have slotted in there, but it seems like they don't really have issues there now. We'll get onto that, I'm sure, later.
Yeah.
But they potentially had issues with their off-tank play with Super on the bench, and he has been playing that. That's where he has slotted in the preseason at least, and it looks like that's what he's doing going forwards into the beginning of the regular season, is playing these off-tank roles, and he has exceeded expectations actually on them, because he's a very quiet player. He has a great idea of where he needs to be and what he needs to do, and he also has a lot of mechanical skill. But sometimes he doesn't seem to have fit within certain team systems particularly well. And this was his first time ever playing a diva, which is a very non-mechanically skill-based hero and very much about how you play within the team and your timings. And he managed to pick it up perfectly. He was playing a very, very good diva, I thought, in the preseason games that we saw, and having a massive amount of impact actually on that role. And one of the biggest reasons that they managed to utterly outperform Florida Mayhem and almost went toe-to-toe with the Valiant as well was down to Nevix's play. And he's also got a really good Zarya and Roadhog as well. So he's been a fantastic pickup for this team, I think.
Yeah.
And it remains to be seen how they're going to utilize him when Super comes back in.
But you have a lot of faith that they can keep using him because he's so diverse, and he's such an intuitive player in a lot of ways. There have been issues with him in the past where he hasn't been the most communicative player in a game, so a lot of teams expected more communication. But his game sense has always been really good, and you can see that he sort of has this natural feel for the game where he knows how to play all these different roles. So he's been valuable. I think he's actually been really underrated in the past because teams have they've sort of like thrown him out because he doesn't, like you say, fit their system. But I think in the right system, Nevix is actually amazing. So it's cool to see how they've been using him here. So if we look at the main tank though, so you've said you get leery when teams have one main tank, and their one main tank is a player called Nomi who used to play for Immortals, and got replaced by Fate on that roster. He was a decent Reinhardt player and has been working on his Winston. Now looks like a decent Winston player from what we saw in the preseason. But still, this guy has never had like a super high ceiling. So are you concerned about Nomi? What do you think about his development? Because we haven't seen him play professionally for a long time between when he left Immortals in the preseason.
Yeah, I am concerned about Nomi, actually. I think that Nomi is one of the tanks I think will be pretty exploitable throughout the season, except for the fact that San Francisco Shock are not putting him in any kind of focal role for the team at the moment. But yeah, as you said, Nomi has just been kind of a decent player, was playing on a championship caliber team, but wasn't able to actually attend the LAN and therefore didn't really win the championship in the end. But he had got the team to that position and was playing at a high level back when he was playing Reinhardt. Mm-hmm. Now it seems like he's a decent Winston.
His Winston has definitely improved, we can say.
Yeah, but across the board, he just seems kind of like an average, possibly below average player tank if you compare him with his peers within the Overwatch League. And so if they were trying to use the tanks as the focal point for San Francisco Shock, I think that would be a potential disaster waiting to happen as the season progresses. But the entire persona of San Francisco Shock is to put all of their focus on their DPS players and also to have Nevix in much more of an aggressive position. And Nomi at the moment, the way that they're utilizing him is really peeling more or just taking advantage of opportunities rather than trying to force the door open himself. And so there's a lot less pressure on his shoulders, I think, and he should be all right within this system.
Okay. So we're going to go to the support players now, the active support players. So Sleepy's a player that came out of the ladder, literally from the ladder. And so we knew nothing about what to expect from this guy when we came into the preseason. And I have to say, he performed super well for his first time on stage. He was playing a great Zenyatta. He was getting a lot of picks. Like, he was noticeably good. So,
yeah,
again, very new. We don't know where this is going, but encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. Brand new. People didn't have any idea of how he was going to perform. And so, understandably, I think most people were like, oh, why have you picked him up? He's probably not going to be that good. He's playing against some real championship caliber players here. But as you said, he was noticeably good, which is something that you don't often say about flex supports or supports in general. But yeah, he was getting a lot of picks. He looked like he was positioning himself relatively well. They play a much more passive style, waiting for other teams to play into them or waiting for picks to occur. So I think that helped Sleepy. not have to deal with the brawl of taking engagements and disengaging from engagements repeatedly. And instead, kind of San Francisco Shock would set up, wait for a pick to happen, and then would push when they're at an advantage. It takes a lot more time, but means that you have safer pushes in general. But I think that Sleepy is going to be relatively good for this team. San Francisco Shock only have one flex support, other than Nevix, who can also play the position, but doesn't seem to be in that position at all. So they've got Sleepy, and then they've got Dak as their two support players. So that means that they're potentially going to struggle with meta changes or have a style that's going to be able to be interpreted by other teams and exploited. But in terms of the mechanical skill and just the baseline of where Sleepy's at, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
And to get to Dak, so Dak's a Spanish player who is one of the leadership figures on the team. We know he's very vocal in the game. He's been a Lucio player typically, and we saw more Lucio from Shock than we might have seen from most of the other teams, because I think that's where Dak is comfortable. He is crazy aggressive on his Lucio. He was like trying to 1v1 Widowmakers and that kind of shit. Like, he plays a very weird style of Lucio coming into this.
Yeah, crazy style of Lucio, and he always has done. He's always played that style. So you've got only one support player that can play that role within the team. He plays one very unique, very distinctive style, and has shown no inclination to change it over past.
Yeah, doesn't give a fuck, clearly.
Yeah, and no inclination to choose another hero either. I think like 99% of his playtime has been on Lucio ever since he picked up the game, and the 1% is probably Mercy that he had to play in the preseason as well. Yeah. And again, slower pace, so he wasn't exploited as much, but certainly when they were playing against London, I mean, Dak looked uncomfortable on Mercy. He's not a natural Mercy player. But I think the leadership and the fact that the coaches are very familiar with how Dak plays and what kind of leadership role he's going to play within the team are positives in his favor. But again, the support lineup for San Francisco Shock is potentially very exploitable, and you know exactly what they're going to do pushing into you.
But this might also be something that during mid-season signings could be bolstered. A lot of questions about Dak, like, is he too limited? Now that he's in a situation where he's able to, be with his team in a room full time, maybe he'll diversify his abilities, but could also be a player that moves into coaching eventually, just given the leadership skills that we know he has. And now we're going to get to Sinatraa and Super, the ineligible players on this roster. So Sinatraa, obviously we love his Tracer, we love his Zarya. He's a young player, seems to have a very high skill ceiling, mechanically gifted. A lot of people were hyped up after seeing him in the Overwatch World Cup. Noticeably, though, obviously a tough match for the Team USA against Korea, but he pretty much got dunked on by Sabyulbi in that series in the one-on-one versus Tracer. So when he's been good, he's been very good. But are we concerned about him not showing up against like top-tier Tracer players from Korea?
I think I actually don't think that he's like gonna get. So I don't think that his individual level is any lower than a lot of the Korean Tracers that are lauded as being fantastic. Sinatra's got incredible individual mechanical skill, and his movements really good. But he's a very confidence-based Tracer, and he has a very unique individual style as well. And so what that does is, if you know when he's going to attack or which direction he's going to attack from, and you can have somebody shut him down at all times, then you've taken out a huge component of whichever team he plays for, because they're normally putting quite a lot of pressure on Sinatraa opening up space or creating picks for them. And as I say, he plays very confident with his movement, so he'll utilize blinks to where he's playing right on the edge. So he's just anticipating that you're not going to hit that shot, and so he's going to be able to survive for another half a second before he blinks. And so when it goes wrong for him, it can continue going wrong for him throughout the entire match until he kind of attunes to where he expects the opponent's damage output to be, or how much danger he anticipates himself to be in. So again, it's another player that plays like a very distinctive, unique style for this team that they're going to have to mesh into a system, and then potentially that system might not be able to be altered that much.
But don't you see it as a potential problem where if they're building around babybay for the first half of the season, and we see a player like Dante or iddqd who's playing, support, he's the one playing the bass while like babybay goes off on some like crazy guitar riff, right? don't you see it an issue potentially that now they have to play around Sinatraa instead of babybay, or there has to be this new synergy because it changes the flavor and the style of the team quite a bit?
Possibly, but I don't think that this team will actually run into that issue. And the reason for that is that the coaching staff have worked with Sinatraa and another superstar hit scan player, very similar to babybay, as in Dafran in the past. So Sinatraa and Dafran had this kind of synergy where the team was really built around Dafran, but Sinatraa was the guy buying a lot of space and making sure that the enemy team were distracted a lot of the time, and allowing Dafran and the rest of the team to play much more aggressively. Now they had to play very aggressive in order for everybody not to just turn on Sinatraa and kill him. And so again, it just increases the unique play style of this team. It means that they have to be more unique. They have to play a more specific play style in order to mesh all these things together. But they know what kind of play style I think they want to go with. A very pick-oriented,
aggressive,
fast, in-your-face approach. Or they'll completely sit back and just play something like the Widowmaker Tracer, where Sinatra's playing off on his own and everyone else is around babybay. So the team, I think, is going to be easy to read, but I don't think they're going to completely fall to pieces and not be able to come up with a structure. In a sense, they are just using a structure that the coaching staff has already done with another team, I think.
So Super's the last player who is ineligible until the second half of the season. He's a flex tank player. You know, I've talked to this team a lot, and one of the things they love about Super, not only is he individually skilled, but he brings a lot of shot calling to this roster. So this is another factor, this is another bonus that they're going to get partway through the season, is that he's very, very vocal and has a great sense of how to call plays within the game. So they're excited to have him actually join up. And that's going to be quite different than Nevix, who's playing that flex tank role right now.
Yes, yeah, it is. And Super previously, I mean, if you get the history of Super as a player, he's always just played the tank role for teams previously. As in the data that people can see, the matches that have been broadcast, Super was always the tank player for a team called LG Evil. And when that team decided to disband with the Overwatch League coming up, and the players went to look for teams to join, Super decided to move over to the off tank at some point during the signing process, and has the entire buzz out of everyone he's played with, everyone he's played against, the coaching staff and stuff like this, is that he's really found his element and come into his own and is a fantastic off-tank player. But previously, when he was playing the tank, he was quite an aggressive tank, quite kill-focused. As you say, a leading figure within the team, very vocal, and pretty intelligent. So I think he's going to play a similar mechanical kind of level to Nevix, but he's going to have the leadership elements. And I wonder whether he's going to flex onto tank at any point as well, or whether he's given that up for good, because I think Nomi might need some propping up at some point during the season if that's a weak point for the team. And Super could potentially add that.
Sure, and that's definitely a possibility depending on Nevix's performance as well, because you wouldn't have expected Nevix to be as good instantly at the diva role, at the off-tank role, as we saw in the preseason, so maybe the shock or surprised by that as well. But the problem is, of course, is that in some metas, being a main tank player does make it more difficult to call, because especially if you're playing Reinhardt, you can't really see what's going on a lot of the time behind you, and you can't call engages. You're following up on engages, whereas with Winston, a lot of the time you're the one committing to the fight first. So it doesn't necessarily fit into his shot calling style potentially the best either. So there will be like a trade-off to be had there if he does go into that main tank role. So we've talked a lot about the style of this team so far, and you mentioned the coaching staff briefly, and the head coach is Brad, who's the owner of Selfless formerly. And so much of what we says goes back to his former team of Selfless and how he chose to run things. And this was a team that became was at one point top 2 in the North American scene, considering that there were teams in Korea like Envy, etc., and Rogue, right? But when they were competing with, say, Immortals, domestically, they looked like one of the better teams in NA. And this was built out of Sinatraa, this was built out of Dafran, and it was built out of a style that was like the most aggressive you can play in Overwatch, literally like spawn camping people on escort maps, just like full court press, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely, and they really got the most out of that style as well. You know, they would just leave a single person on the cart and go right up. You know, on attack, they would be spawn camping the defenders while the cart
Yes.
was just being pushed by their Reinhardt miles away. And so the Lucio Dak would be right pressed up, spawn camping with them as well. And they know that even if they wipe there, they'll be another fight on the payload. But most of the time, they're raw individual talent and this hyper aggressive play style where they're playing with a Tracer, a Soldier 76, and a Roadhog. So you've got a lot of self sustain and dodging ability, but you've also got a huge amount of damage potential as well. Worked really well for them. And it was such a unique style that their coaching staff had come up with to fit around the players that I have confidence that that's the kind of style that we'll see coming up from San Francisco Shock as well, because they've got all the pieces to work with it as well. Their star player previously, Defran, hasn't been picked up, but
is he going to get picked up by this team?
I think he could well be. I think a mid-season signing of Defran is about 60% likely for San Francisco Shock. I would not be surprised at all. However, babybay is their kind of stand-in for now, and isn't. I mean, Defran is potentially the best DPS player in the world. It's got to be said. But babybay is another potentially world-class player who has some of those talents, and they're building around him in the same kind of way that they built Selfless around Defran. And I think they know how to use those pieces. But again, it's a very unique style. It's really, you can't adapt it that much. It's nowhere near as versatile as other styles where you can easily disengage and play different maps and have lots of different attacking routes. You know exactly what you're going to get. The reason the style worked is because they had massive individual skill, and it was just, it was at its essence was just a very good style. It was just very difficult to beat the one look that they continued to throw at you. But once you'd nailed it down, and as long as you were very disciplined playing against them, they eventually started to fall off a little bit.
And he's bringing over as an assistant coach, Legit RC, who also worked with Selfless and then worked with Cloud9 later on. So he has really brought in his own people. And Harsha, who you may know from his many videos, podcasts, analytic pieces, is also being brought on as an analyst for this roster. So, you know, they have a pretty solid coaching staff. But you're right, it is very much of one mind, of the Selfless mind. They are going to, we assume they're going to play that Selfless style. So where do we see these guys placing? Because for them, could they be a playoff team? I think the question is, how well do they do in stage 1 and 2 before they get access to Sinatraa and Super, and maybe Defran if they sign him? So how well are they going to do in stage 1 and 2? And does that record make a playoff spot maybe an option if they do super well in stages 3 and 4?
I think it would be possible for this team to get into the playoffs, but the meta would have to go nicely for them. I think they're such a unique team, and the way that they want to craft their team is so individual that the meta would have to play ball with them as they go through. Because if they get something that's very slow-paced and control oriented, as in you have to control the pace of the game, stuff like the old Reinhardt Diva Soldier 76 meta or triple tank or something like this, I think this team would struggle a little bit to nail down the timings and the team synergy. And also, if they're just forced to play dive, they're going to get out-dived by so many of these teams, I think. But if they can add their own unique flavor and get big performances out of babybay and heroes like Widowmaker, Soldier 76, possibly Nevix having big performances as well, then I think they could creep into the playoffs. But they're only going to have one style, and I really just cannot see them beating the top teams that have so much experience with one style.
Well, we've already seen that start to be a problem, right? Because when we look at Spitfire, they were playing Shock came in, they wanted to play Tracer Widowmaker, pick compositions, and what did we see London do? They just put up a million barriers, basically played a more defensive pick composition where they were just putting their Widowmaker behind Orisa barriers, and they were the ones creating the picks instead. They just sort of turtled up, and then Shock got absolutely demolished. So that's my concern coming in, is that Selfless got away with a lot of this because the teams didn't have the infrastructure to properly scout them or form counter strategies that they were playing against when they were at their peak in NA, because most of the good NA teams were in Korea at that moment in time, right? And so they went relatively unopposed against a weak field. But when we talk about teams like, the Kongdu players, the GC Busan players that compose the London Spitfire roster, they got a very fast read on that and just smashed them. So that would be my worry, is that they have to have some other dimension to their style of play.
Yeah, again, if you put too much of your emphasis on one individual player, it's going to be very easy for other teams to read that. The best teams in the world have not had only one individual star player, or even the teams that have had one star player, they don't build their teams around that star player. He's just having a massive performance from a role that fits with the rest of the team. The guys that are building around superstar players and trying to make them the best that they can possibly be, it's not a style that's historically worked in Overwatch, and it can be shut down pretty easily. So I think I'm kind of concerned about San Francisco Shock. I think that even though their coaching staff has good pieces to work with and probably has an idea in their head of how they want to utilize those pieces, I think as the season progresses, even though they unlock Sinatraa and Super, they might be less likely to achieve success rather than more likely, because they're not going to, I don't think they're going to play a fundamental style of Overwatch and try and play along with the meta. I think they're going to try and forge their own way through it and just batter their heads against a brick wall and keep getting read by other teams.
Well, it could surprise some teams, though, right? Like, I think you're going to get the occasional upset win. I see this team as sort of a wild card. Like, I think that sometimes they're going to, like, randomly take out, like, a top 4 team. You'll be like, are these guys good now? But their consistency is going to be questionable. So I see them more as, like, a 7th to 9th place team in the league, probably with a record a little bit under 500, I think is a reasonable place to put them.
Yeah, I think they'll be in the lower half of the table by the end of it, and they're one of the teams that I'm very concerned about is just going to flop completely throughout the course of the season. If they keep trying like a Widowmaker style, for example, and they just don't realize that if an enemy team is good enough at how they're setting people up and diving you're going to lose every time if you just try and play a Widowmaker style permanently, and you don't have like a collapse comp ready to like bait them. You're just waiting for the picks. That's never going to work. So I think
wait literally forever if you're just
yeah. So you have to like play a bit of a bait style rather than just waiting for picks. So I think if the meta goes well for them, they could end in a playoff spot. But they're one of the teams that I'm concerned about is going to actually finish like right at the bottom of the barrel if they just keep hammering their heads against a brick wall, because they really do have all the pieces they need to build a fantastic team, and they could come out with something just magical if they manage to find something like the previous Selfless composition that worked so well for them. But they're going to play unorthodox Overwatch, I think, and most of the time that's not going to work against the best teams in the world that have all the time in the world to prepare for them as well.
All right, well, sounds good. That's our preview of the San Francisco Shock. Thanks for joining me. Again, there will be more Overwatch League team previews on this channel for each and every team in this league. I'll be having various experts join me to discuss them and get you introduced before the league starts. So thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for joining me, Sideshow.
Thank you.